Former police officer Mike Harris had seen his fair share of bizarre and unsettling scenes during his 25-year career. Yet, one nightmarish incident still haunted his dreams, keeping him awake many nights. It was the night he and his rookie partner, Sarah, responded to a disturbance call at an abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town. It was a stormy night, the kind where the wind howled like a pack of wolves and rain pelted the windows with a relentless fury. Dispatch had received multiple reports of strange noises and lights coming from the old Stone Haven Asylum, a place that had been abandoned for decades and was rumored to be haunted. Most officers would brush it off as teenagers playing pranks, but Mike had a gut feeling this was different. "Let's just get this over with," Mike muttered to Sarah as they pulled up to the dilapidated building. The asylum loomed in the darkness, its windows like empty eye sockets staring into the abyss. The iron gate creaked ominously as they pushed it open, and their flashlights cut through the thick fog like knives. Inside, the air was musty and cold, filled with the scent of mold and decay. Their footsteps echoed eerily down the long, empty corridors, each step amplifying the tension that hung in the air. The asylum was a maze of narrow hallways and empty rooms, each one telling a story of its own, with peeling wallpaper and rusted metal beds left to rot.
"Mike, do you hear that?"
Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. There was a faint, rhythmic tapping sound coming from the end of the corridor. They cautiously approached, their flashlights revealing an old metal door partially ajar. The sound grew louder, and as they pushed the door open, they were greeted by a sight that made their blood run cold. In the center of the room stood an old wheelchair, and sitting in it was a doll. But this was no ordinary doll. It was a life-sized mannequin dressed in a tattered hospital gown, with glassy eyes that seemed to follow their every move. The tapping noise was coming from the mannequin's hand, which was rhythmically hitting the armrest of the wheelchair. "Jesus, what the hell is this?" Mike muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah took a step back, her flashlight trembling in her hand. Before they could react, the doors slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. They spun around, but there was no one there. The room plunged into darkness as their flashlights flickered and died. Panic set in as they fumbled to turn them back on, the darkness pressing in around them like a suffocating blanket. When the lights finally came back on, the mannequin was gone. The wheelchair sat empty in the middle of the room, and the tapping had stopped. But now there was a new sound, a faint, chilling whisper that seemed to come from all directions. "Get out," it hissed, the voice barely audible but unmistakably menacing. "Leave this place." Mike and Sarah exchanged a terrified glance. They didn't need to be told twice. They bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if some unseen force was holding it shut. The whispers grew louder, filling the room with a cacophony of voices all saying the same thing. "Get out." Desperate, Mike threw his shoulder against the door, and finally, it gave way. They stumbled into the hallway, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The asylum seemed to come alive around them, with shadows dancing on the walls and eerie laughter echoing through the corridors. They sprinted down the hallway, not daring to look back. The exit was just ahead, the old iron gate, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. As they burst through the gate, the whispers abruptly stopped, and the asylum fell silent once more. Back in the safety of their patrol car, Mike and Sarah sat in stunned silence, their hearts pounding. They radioed in the incident, but when other officers arrived, the asylum was empty. There were no signs of the mannequin, the whispers, or anything unusual. To this day, Mike couldn't explain what happened that night at Stone Haven Asylum. But one thing was certain: some places were better left undisturbed, and some mysteries were better left unsolved. Retired police sergeant Karen Blake thought he had seen it all during her tenure in the force. From grisly crime scenes to high-speed chases, nothing seemed to rattle her. But there was one night that still sent shivers down her spine. The night she encountered the phantom of Black Hollow Road. It was a quiet Tuesday evening and Karen was on patrol alone. Her usual partner, Dave, had called in sick, so she was covering their usual beat by herself. Black Hollow Road was a desolate stretch of asphalt that wound through dense woods, a place where the trees seemed to close in on the road, making it feel like a tunnel of shadows. Karen was driving slowly, her headlights piercing the inky darkness, when she saw a figure standing on the side of the road. It was a woman, dressed in a flowing white dress, her long dark hair cascading over her shoulders. She seemed out of place, like a ghostly apparition against the backdrop of the night. Slowing down, Karen rolled down her window. "Ma'am, are you all right?" she called out. The woman didn't respond, just stood there staring at her. Concerned, Karen pulled over and stepped out of the car, her hand instinctively resting on her holster. "Ma'am, do you need help?" she asked again, this time more assertively. The woman slowly turned her head to face Karen, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked. Karen felt a chill run down her spine. There was something unsettling about the woman's gaze, something otherworldly. Before Karen could react, the woman started walking towards the woods, her movements slow and deliberate. Without thinking, Karen followed her. The woman moved with an eerie grace, her white dress billowing in the night air. The woods were eerily silent, the usual sounds of nocturnal animals absent. Karen called for backup, describing the situation as she followed the woman deeper into the woods. "I need assistance on Black Hollow Road. I'm following a woman. She seems distressed. I'm heading into the woods." "Over." Static crackled over the radio, but no response came through. Frustrated, Karen pocketed the radio and continued on, determined not to lose sight of the mysterious woman. The forest seemed to close in around her, the trees forming a dense canopy that blocked out the moonlight. Suddenly, the woman stopped and turned to face Karen. They were standing in a small clearing, the moonlight casting an ethereal glow around them. "Why are you here?" the woman whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm here to help you," Karen replied, trying to sound calm despite the fear creeping up her spine. "Are you lost? Do you need assistance?" The woman shook her head slowly. "You can't help me," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "No one can." Before Karen could respond, the woman started to fade, her form becoming translucent. Panic surged through Karen as she reached out to grab her, but her hand passed through thin air. The woman's face twisted into a sorrowful smile before she vanished completely, leaving Karen alone in the clearing. Heart pounding, Karen stumbled back to her patrol car, her mind racing. What had she just witnessed? Who was that woman? Her radio suddenly crackled to life and she heard Dave's voice. "Karen, are you there? What's your status?" "Dave, you won't believe what just happened," Karen said, trying to steady her voice. She explained everything, but when backup arrived, there was no sign of the woman. The woods were silent and empty, as if nothing had happened. The next day, Karen did some digging and discovered that Black Hollow Road had a dark history. Years ago, a young woman named Emily had been killed in a hit-and-run accident on that very stretch of road. The driver was never found, and Emily's spirit was said to haunt the area, searching for justice. Karen couldn't shake the feeling that she had encountered Emily's restless spirit that night. Despite the skepticism of her colleagues, she believed that Emily was trying to reach out, to tell her story. Karen made it her mission to investigate the old case, hoping to bring some peace to the ghost of Black Hollow Road. Though the case remained unsolved, Karen's encounter left a lasting impression on her. She never drove down Black Hollow Road alone again, and every time she passed that stretch of road, she couldn't help but feel a chill in the air, as if Emily's spirit was still watching, waiting for justice. Detective John Larson had always prided himself on being a rational man, grounded in logic and evidence. He had seen countless cases during his 20 years on the force, from homicides to kidnappings, but there was one night he could never quite explain, the night he patrolled the edge of the Whispering Pines forest. It was a bitterly cold December night. The town had just been blanketed by a fresh layer of snow, and everything was eerily quiet. John was driving his squad car along the old forest road, his breath fogging up the window despite the heater running at full blast. Whispering Pines Forest was notorious for being a hotspot for illegal activities, and there had been reports of strange lights and sounds coming from the woods that evening. Another wild goose chase, John muttered to himself as he turned onto the narrow dirt road that led deeper into the forest. He wasn't looking for Ward to trudging through the snow on a cold night, but it was his job to check out every report, no matter how ridiculous it seemed. After driving for a few minutes, John saw a faint light flickering between the trees. He parked his car at the side of the road and grabbed his flashlight and radio. "Dispatch, this is Detective Larson. I'm investigating a possible disturbance in Whispering Pines Forest. I'll keep you posted." Static crackled over the radio, followed by a faint acknowledgement. John clicked off the radio and started walking towards the light. The snow crunched under his boots, and his breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. As he moved deeper into the forest, the light grew brighter, flickering like a candle in the wind. John soon found himself standing in a small clearing. In the center was an old, decrepit cabin that looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. The windows were dark and the door hung slightly ajar. The light he had seen was coming from inside, casting eerie shadows on the snow-covered ground. "Police, is anyone there?" John called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. There was no response. He cautiously approached the cabin, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The door creaked loudly as he pushed it open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished, with only a few pieces of broken furniture and a small fireplace in the corner. The light was coming from a single candle placed on a wooden table in the center of the room. The flame flickered wildly, casting long shadows on the walls. John's eyes scanned the room, and he noticed something strange. There were no footprints in the snow outside leading to the cabin, and the interior looked untouched by human presence. It was as if the candle had been lit by an unseen hand. "Hello, is anyone here?" John called out again, stepping further into the cabin. He felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the cold weather outside. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, and a sense of unease settled over him. As he turned to leave, John heard a faint whisper. He froze, straining to hear. The whisper grew louder, filling the room with a soft, indistinct murmur. It was like a chorus of voices, all speaking at once, but he couldn't make out any words. "Who's there?" John demanded, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. Then the candle flame flared up, casting a blinding light that forced John to shield his eyes. When he lowered his hand, the cabin had changed. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and the air was filled with the smell of burning incense. John's heart pounded in his chest as he realized he was no longer alone. Figures began to emerge from the shadows, their faces obscured by dark hoods. One of the figures stepped forward, pulling back its hood to reveal a gaunt, pale face with piercing blue eyes. "You shouldn't have come here," the figure said in a cold, echoing voice. "What is this place? Who are you?" John demanded, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. The figure ignored his questions. "Leave now or face the consequences," it said, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. John didn't need any more encouragement. He backed out of the cabin, his hair tracing. As soon as he stepped outside, the whispers started again, louder this time, and the light from the cabin extinguished, plunging the clearing into darkness. He ran back to his car, the sound of the whispers following him. When he reached the safety of his vehicle, he radioed for backup, but by the time other officers arrived, the cabin had vanished. There were no tracks, no light, and no sign that anyone had ever been there. To this day, John couldn't explain what he experienced in the Whispering Pines forest. It was a mystery that defied logic and reason, a night that left him questioning everything he thought he knew. And even now, years later, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching, waiting for the next unwary soul to wander into its domain. If you want to see more horror stories, check out my next video.